Today, I want to read some parts of this book. Specifically, the book is It Abuse? And I came across it when the topic of spiritual abuse, when I was introduced to the topic of spiritual abuse in regards to a church that I was in regards to how that shepherd exercised his authority and his position of leadership, his position of power. So I thought this book was helpful. It talks about abuse, like domestic abuse, but I think a lot of the principles are really helpful in regards to spiritual abuse when you have that power dynamic in the religious sphere, when you have like a shepherd or someone in a position of religious authority. So a lot of the context is in regards to domestic abuse, but the principles are applicable in the spiritual sphere as well. So here's the first page. If you want to read it, it paints a scenario that's more about in the home, but that's the first page. And this is chapter 3 from the book, Is It Abuse? A Biblical Guide to Identifying Domestic Abuse. And chapter 3 is the dynamics of abuse. So that's the first page. This is the second page. So here it talks about like abuse. It has to do with like oppression and oppressor, the oppressor and the oppressed. So oppression is so much more than an anger problem or a marriage problem. Oppression is about coercive control. Oppressive behavior is not provoked. It is behavior that accomplishes something for the abuser. It is an expression of pernicious entitlement. So what is at the root of oppression? We all know what it is like to feel entitled. It happens when our desires, even if they are desires for good things, turn perverse. I demand, I am owed, I have the right to insist, what I want matters most. And then they give an example of that dynamic in the home. Oppressors feel that their efforts to get what they want are so justified that they are blind or indifferent to the effects that their demands have on others. So that's another mindset of an oppressor, someone who's like domineering in a position of authority. God desires us to live in such a way that we seek to love Him and others above ourselves. Oppressors demand that others love and serve them. We will consider the reasons for this in the next section. So it talks about the root of oppression. While we all struggle with entitlement, oppressors exhibit patterns of demanding and punishing that are entrenched, unbending, and unrelenting. Ordinary entitlement becomes pernicious when it leads a person to punish those who stand in the way of their demands. A toxic, entitled person deflects all blame, admits no wrongdoing, rationalizes punishing behaviors as being an appropriate response. Entitlement can harm any relationship, but especially in a marriage. Pernicious entitlement creates a climate of fear in which one spouse works hard to keep the other from being angry and punishing. Even if the oppressed spouse makes a change, it will not improve the marriage and can empower further oppression by feeding the very fire she is trying to extinguish. So again, it talks about these principles at play like within a marriage between like a husband and wife, but you can have this power dynamic in like the religious sphere in the church if you have a oppressive pastor and that relationship between like the pastor and the sheep, the shepherd and the sheep. Entitlement and an oppressor. Much confusion related to abuse comes down to misunderstandings about why a person acts oppressively toward another. It is vital to understand that toxic entitlement is at the core of oppression. Oppressors are so invested in their own needs that they believe the primary reason other people exist is to fulfill their demands. When those people fail to do so, they penalize them. Some use aggressive tactics such as yelling, name-calling, throwing objects, or worse. Some use passive tactics such as lying, ignoring their victims, or withdrawing. Either way, they use domination and fear to get power so they can live the lives they want. they seek to control and hurt the offending person. In each of the following examples, notice how the entitled person's response to the problem is intended not only to punish or blame, but also to control the outcome. Again, there's some examples if you want to pause and read through them. Oppressors believe that they are the center of the world around them. They are largely unaware of the concerns, needs, and significance of others. They earnestly believe that their view of life and relationships is true and right. But of course, this is a distorted sense of reality. Let's take a look at 6 false beliefs that are common to entitled people. Entitled people may not be consciously aware of these beliefs, but they live them out functionally in their relationships, and most notably their marriages. So you will not typically hear an oppressor articulate these beliefs, but will instead need to uncover them. Depending on the individual who is holding them, some beliefs are more prominent than others, and not every oppressor holds all 6. I will describe the mindset of each belief and how it affects a marriage relationship. So again, it talks about, these principles at play with like a husband and wife, but you can see it in an abusive pastor as well, these mindsets. So key belief number 1, it's all about me. The mindset, the entitled believe that they hold a special status. Their rights matter most. This is selfishness at its most extreme. It is blind, self-focused, utterly wicked at its core, and horribly destructive. The larger oppressive people's view is of themselves, the more their vision will be eclipsed by their own needs and desires. And in effect, the more blind they will be to how their demands affect others, and the more unable they will be to realize that other people have needs and desires too. In short, oppressors lack empathy. How can you empathize with a person whom you won't take the time to understand? It is also likely that oppressors are unaware that their spouses may possess thoughts that are different from their own and are even valuable. They demand that their spouses look at their world as if they are the center of it. So again, it talks about spouses, but you could have congregants. Many shepherds possess, it is also likely that shepherds are unaware that their congregants may possess thoughts that are different from their own and are even valuable. So you could change the terms, and the principles are still the same. Key belief number 2, you and I need to listen only to me. Mindset, entitled people are always right and know what is best. Their opinions of others are, the opinions of others are inconvenient, irrelevant, or inaccurate. Since other people are wrong, those who are entitled will dismiss, ignore, mock, or verbally annihilate their concerns. It is only their own knowledge or opinion that matters. When their spouses disagree with them, they will likely experience this disagreement as rejection or as being undermined, and harmful consequences result when they respond in punishing ways. Again, there's an example of marital dynamics. Key belief number 3, rules are not for me to follow, they are to keep me happy. Hypocrisy. Mindset, I have rules for you to obey in order to keep me happy, but you cannot have any expectations of me. The rules of an entitled person may sound like, you have to keep a tight budget, but I can splurge on the latest technology. Or this house must be kept immaculate, but I can leave my stuff where I want. The entitled person's love of personal comfort and control usually results in a double standard. Do as I say, but not as I do. The rules that entitled people set for others are not applied to themselves. Key belief number 4, my anger is justified. Mindset, oppressors' anger is justified simply because they think they are right. They do not see their anger as a problem and won't understand or confess their culpability for it. In their minds, their angry responses are reasonable because they have the perception that they have been sinned against. Simply put, my anger is your fault. There's, again, another example of that in marital dynamics. Key belief number 5, other people attack me. Mindset, when someone brings up a complaint or even a concern, Entitled people interpret this as an attack. They are not open to other people reminding them about anything or offering input or opinions. When someone does, they experience it as an assault. Simple requests get blown out of proportion, and suggestions of any kind are unwelcome. And you'll have people that come up with the sin of the public airing of grievances. It's like if you express a grievance or complaint openly, it's a sin. You can't bring up a complaint or even a concern. That's a sin. The entitled person will not even entertain as a possibility the idea that a comment could be an attempt to help. Instead, they react to it as if they are being attacked. So they'll view it in like a negative, like, oh, you keep correcting people. It's like they view correction as an attack. They don't see, it's like for them, correction is good. But if correction goes upwards, well, it's viewed as a bad thing. Correction only goes downward, not upwards. Key belief number 6, I don't have to appreciate what you do, but I demand that you appreciate what I do. Mindset. I call this the bank account mentality. Entitled people remember all the deposits of good deeds that they have ever made. When someone has a complaint against them, they expect that person to see that their deposits are still in the black. In their minds, all their earlier deposits should cancel out any complaints. They are not interested in looking at what they are actually doing now. They would prefer to reference a point in the past when their account was in good standing. At the same time, they might not acknowledge or appreciate any of the deposits that their spouses have made. Those are just expected. Or maybe they are manipulatively appreciative for inconsequential things in an attempt to distract their victims from their controlling, perpetual dissatisfaction. Either way, there is a high imbalance in the oppressive spouse's scorekeeping. Or if you have like an oppressive shepherd, you see that also. So I thought those beliefs were helpful, that mindset, that double standard, that hypocrisy, that rules are for you to obey, but you can't have any expectations the other way around. So then there's some questions for reflection, and then this section entitled People Have a Worship Problem. Oppressors do not only lack empathy and punish others. Underneath the 6 key beliefs that are at the root of entitlement and the damaging behaviors that it causes is the most significant and detrimental distortion of all, a worship problem. Oppressors see themselves as the center of their world. Their hearts say, I was created to be worshipped, not to worship. But God is the center of all things. He created us to worship Him. So when me rules all, God is dethroned, worship is impeded, and Christian growth is stunted. Oppressors require everyone else to be devoted to them, not to God. There are 3 ways that they do this. 1, they demand to be worshipped. Oppressors functionally believe that they should be the sole object of others' concern and care. Their needs and desires are most important, and others should lay down their own desires and preferences in order to serve them. 2, they demand obedience from others. They set up rules that contribute to their own comfort and expect their spouses to abide by those rules. When the rules are violated, oppressors respond not with the forgiving grace of our one true God, but rather with the burning anger of one who feels violated and justified in punishing. So you can have that with a husband and a spouse, or you can have that with like a shepherd and the sheep. They demand obedience from others. Number 3, they are not obligated to anyone. Oppressors ignore God's call for us to love our neighbors as ourselves, and they feel justified in doing so. Oppressors ignore God's call for us to love our neighbors as ourselves, and they feel justified in doing so. Others must love them, but they do not love reciprocally. Their marriages are not based on mutual care. because one spouse subjects the other to unrelenting desires, expectations, and demands. So again, like a lot of this, the context is a husband and wife, but you can see that power play in effect in like a church with the pastor and the sheep. So here's a side-by-side with self-worship and true worship. Self-worship as a distortion of true worship. Self-worship. It's all about me. All creation exists for me to serve my needs and my wants. You and I need to listen only to me. My words are wiser and truer than anyone else's. My thoughts are infallible and perfect. Rules are not for me to follow. They are to keep me happy. Everyone should worship me, should keep my rules, and bring me comfort, glory, and honor. My anger is justified. I do not require forgiveness. My anger is good and just. Whereas true worship, it's like all things were created by God and exist to bring him glory. Therefore, I am created to bring him glory. God's words alone are infallible and perfect. I must lean not on my own understanding of myself, but must ask him to search my heart. God alone should be worshipped, and his laws are ultimate. I am called to live by his rules. God's anger alone is fully justified and perfect, and he alone justifies me. Again, self-worship. Other people attack me. I do not hurt others. They injure me. I am already sanctified. Whereas God alone is perfect and above criticism. I need God's help in order to be sanctified. And then self-worship. I don't have to appreciate what you do, but I demand that you appreciate what I do. You owe me honor for all that I have provided for you. Whereas true worship, God alone deserves our worship, and he is the giver of every good gift. I am to look to him with a heart of gratefulness and dependence. And it's like we can only serve with the power that God supplies. So at the end of the day, God gets the glory. We are to let our light so shine before men that they can see our good works and glorify our Father in heaven. So any good that comes from people, like, that's to the glory of God. Screening for entitlement. We all struggle with entitlement. Yes, even you and me. The Bible is clear that we are selfish and prideful people. Yet people who oppress others have a uniquely severe worship problem. Even among oppressors, we will find varying degrees of punishments and see different spectrums of severity. But all oppressors have a perspective on life that does not reflect God's established reality, and this cripples their relationship with him. When this severe worship problem exists in a marriage, it is disastrous and often dangerous. When most Christians approach a troubled marriage, they think the marriage's problem as involving two sinners who are each contributing sinful patterns to the relationship, as I did with Sarah and Matt. We fail to take into account the possible presence of oppressive dynamics, the way I did with Jenny. We will fail to help, or worse, we will unknowingly cause victims harm. Assessing the severity of entitlement when we encounter marital conflict is one way that we can begin to detect whether abuse is occurring. So then I'm going to, I don't know if I'll make this a separate part. Abusive entitlement screening questions. When we first suspect that oppression might be occurring in a marriage, we can screen for it indirectly by attempting to see if one of the spouses is displaying signs of abusive entitlement. You can pause this. So here are the questions. And again, this can, the context is like an abusive spouse, but if you have an abusive shepherd, these questions are also relevant. Are you afraid to disagree with your spouse or pastor? What happens when you try to share an opinion that differs from your spouse's? Does your spouse ever ignore you? If so, for how long and when? Can you tell when your spouse is angry? Be specific. What does his anger look like? What does he say or do? When you are talking about hard things, what are some ways that your spouse expresses disagreement? Mocking you, walking away, rolling his eyes, throwing things. What happens if you let him down? Do you feel that there are two sets of rules, one for you and one for your spouse? Do you feel pressure to do things you do not want to do? Does your spouse remind you of times when you sinned against him? When and how? So I think those questions are helpful. And here they give an example, the parable of the trees. As we seek to grasp the evils of oppressive and controlling behaviors, we can turn to the vivid imagery of Scripture. The parable of the trees in Judges 9 enabled me to understand both the hearts of those who rule by domination and the consequences of this rule for the dominated. So the backstory, the book of Judges records the events in an era before there was a king in Israel. During this time, God raised up leaders, called them judges to help his people. Gideon was one such judge. After Gideon's death, one of his 70 sons. So the parable, the trees once went out to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, shall I leave my abundance by which gods and men are honored and go hold sway over the trees? And the trees said to the fig tree, you, come reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit and go hold sway over the trees? And the trees said to the vine, you, come and reign over us. But the vine said to them, shall I leave my wine that cheers God and men and go hold sway over the trees? Then all the trees said to the bramble, you, come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. So the interpretation of the parable. In this parable, the trees, which represent Israel, ask for a ruler. The olive, the fig, and vine rightly refuse the other trees' request to rule over them, because they have a clear sense of their own fruitful calling. They know what they are created for and delighting in fulfilling their purpose. Since they are more ready to serve than to rule, they are not tempted to covet a role that is not theirs. They do not vie for power, control, or glory. The bramble, however, has a different reaction. It gladly offers to rule over the trees, but with an ironic and ridiculous promise. Take refuge in my shade. A bramble is leafless and thorny and cannot offer shelter. The particular type of bramble that grows in Israel has thorns that are inches long. As a low-growing bush, it offers taller trees no shade. It does not protect from the sun. Even worse, it grows rapidly and chokes out and pierces whatever it surrounds. It is clearly not a suitable leader for the trees, but it grasps for the role anyways. The bramble is showing its character and its propensity for destroying and oppressing when it states that it is even willing to use fire to destroy anything that stands in its way. Jotham's parable rings true as Abimelech's reign unfolds. In order to maintain power, he continues to kill people. He even pours salt on the land, obliterating its farming potential. See Judges 9:45. Like the bramble, Abimelech is an oppressor. He quests for power and control that is not rightfully his. His tyranny harms others, just as the bramble is not an appropriate king for the trees. Abimelech is not a worthy leader for Israel. Both desire to dominate those who are under their control. When crossed, their response is to destroy the offender who has crossed them. The application. When we know what the oppressor in a marriage is like and what the oppressed spouse is experiencing, we will approach them differently from how we would other married couples. So that it gives application in a marriage. But again, I think my focus was on oppressive church leadership when I came across this book, Spiritual Abuse and Abuse of Power. And then they have questions on reflection. And that's the end of chapter 3. I thought it was helpful when you look at the mindset of entitled people. Typically, those are, if you have an entitled person in a position of power, it's not good. So it's how you can kind of identify that mindset and make sure it's not in yourself as a husband, a mother, whatever authority that you have to not be entitled, and to call it out if you see it in those in positions of power over you, especially in the religious sphere, where it's like those people are where they have a profession of faith where they want to honor God. So if they have that entitled mentality at play in how they exercise their rule and reign, you should seek to turn them from that, call it out, and turn them from that. Okay, thanks.